Tucket's Travels by Gary Paulson.
Lottie saw him staring. Could it be buffalo? She watched the dust. A small herd? Not here, Frances thought. Not here in this dust and heat, with no grass and no water. Buffalo wouldn't be that stupid. Sure, it's buffalo. You're lying, she sighed. I can tell when you're lying to me, Frances Tucket. It's them, isn't it? Francis said nothing, but his mind was racing. So the riders were heading back eastward. But why would they be coming back so soon? Had they caught Grimes already? If so, they'd be looking for the children. Or had they given up all the chase? Or just seen Grimes and found that he was alone and turned back, still looking for the children? They might miss the tracks. He knew this was a vain hope. Vain. This was a vain hope. There hadn't been a breath of wind to blow the dust over the brush marks he'd left. And undoubtedly, they had men who were good trackers, men who were alive because they could track mice over rocks. So the Comancheros would find them. And then, oh God, it will happen. We all know what will happen if they caught them. He looked to the trees, which were about 2 miles away. He could carry Billy here. There. They could get to the trees in time. Then what? The riders would keep coming back until they came to the place where Francis and the children had turned off, about 9 miles back. They would see the marks and turn and start north. 9 miles. The horses would be tired, but they would make 10 miles an hour. They had to ride maybe 20 miles back to the turn and then 9 or 10 miles north after the children. He let the figures work through his tired brain. Maybe 4 hours, but more likely 3. The riders would be on them in 3 hours. Francis and Billy and Lottie would need an hour to make the trees, and then nothing. It would all just happen later. They'd get him and take the children, and nothing would have changed, except that a few horses would be very tired, and he, Francis, would be dead. And as for what would happen to Lottie and Billy, his heart grew cold. But there was something else back there, more than just the plum of dust. There was a cloud. At first it was low on the horizon and showed only as a grey line, so low that Francis almost didn't see it. But it was growing rapidly, in a fast pace, rapidly, the wind bringing it from the west, and it grew and rose. He could see that it was the top edge of a thunderhead. It didn't look like salvation, not at first. He had seen plenty of prairie thunderheads, but as he watched it, he realized 2 things. One, it was growing rapidly, roaring along on the high winds, coming toward them at a much faster rate than the horses of the Comancheros. 2, it would bring rain. Oh, they needed rain. They do need rain. Rain that would ease their thirst and cool their burning bodies. And far more important, rain that might wipe out their tracks, erase everything they had left behind them. Still, it was a race and nothing was sure. The clouds had to keep coming to beat the horsemen to where the children's track turned north, and it had to rain. It just had to. If the clouds turned off or didn't beat the Comancheros or didn't leave rain, then distance was all the children had. They needed to get to the trees and build some kind of defense. Francis picked up Billy, who was still sound asleep and seemed to weigh a ton. He set off a shambling walk, abandoning the tedious brushing in their race to get to the trees. Lottie shuffled ahead, carrying Francis' bag. She was wearing a ragged shift, so dirty it seemed to be made of earth. Her yellow hair was full of dust. Frances wore buckskin, but the children only had what was left of their original clothing and what they'd managed to pick up along the way. We're a sight, Francis thought, a ragtag mob of a sight. He looked at the trees, and they didn't seem any closer. He looked at the cloud, and it was still building, though it seemed to be heading off slightly to the south. He looked at the dust plume, and it was still moving on the same line eastward, getting ready to cross their trail. He looked back to the trees and thought, I would absolutely kill for that old mule we had. But the mule had been taken by the Comancheros. They reached the trees just as the edge of the clouds caught up with them. 10 more feet, and I would have died, Lottie whispered and sank to the ground. Francis dropped Billy like a stone. The boy fell without awakening. Oh, look at that. He was so tired then. And studied their location. It was a meandering dry stream bed with a row of stunted but leafy cottonwoods on each side. There were also stands of salt cedar, thick and green, and while no water was evident, the stream bed seemed moist. Francis knew there was water beneath the surface, or the trees would have been dead. Lottie, scoop a hole there, at the base of that rock. You want to start digging? Why don't you just go ahead? I have more important things to do than scrape at the old ground. Water. Francis was so dry he croaked. Dig down and let it seep in. Oh, well, why didn't you say so? Lottie knelt by the rock and started digging in the loose sand with her hands. When she was down 2 feet, she yelped. Here it is, just like you said. Coming from the side. Oh, Francis, it's so clear. Come see. She scooped some up and drank it. Sweet as sugar. Come, try it. Francis knelt and cupped his hand and drank and thought he had never tasted anything so good. But he stopped before he was full. The wind was picking up now, blowing hard enough to lift dust and even sand, and he could no longer see the dust from the riders. The wind was blowing at the coming thunderheads, and he smiled, because even if it didn't rain, there was a good chance the wind would fill in and destroy their tracks. By now, the thunderhead was over them, dark, so huge it covered the whole sky, and the wind had increased to a scream. Figurative language. A metaphor is a description that compares one thing to another thing without using like or as. As you read this page, think of what metaphor does the author use on this page to describe the sound of the wind. Check the last sentence. Explain the metaphor's meaning. So check the last sentence. The wind had increased to a scream. Thank you.